Locked On recruiting expert released his top head coach recruiters in the nation. Which ACC coaches made the list?
You are Locked On ACC, your daily podcast on the Atlantic Coast Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone. This is Locked On ACC. I'm Jackson Holzer, the host of Locked On Syracuse. Of course, we're always joined by Kenton Gibbs, one of the hosts of Locked On Wolfpack and former NC State defensive tackle. And we got a great show for you all this Friday afternoon. CBS Sports released their most impactful ACC transfers yesterday, so we'll discuss that on today's show. Also, we're going to begin the podcast talking about the best head coach recruiters in the country, according to Locked On recruiting expert Brian Smith. So tons to talk about here on today's show. And without further ado, since this episode is brought to you by nobody, we can get straight into the list here from Brian Smith. I'm going to pull it up for those that are watching on YouTube. And if you're listening to this podcast on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, I will read you the list and the ACC coaches that made the cut. So here it is. Here's the list for those that are watching on YouTube. Take it all in. And now I'm going to read it. All right. Kirby Smart from Georgia came in at number 1. At number 2, Mario Cristobal from Miami. Number 3, Ryan Day at Ohio State. Number 4, Dan Lanning at Oregon. Number 5, James Franklin for Penn State. Number 6, Marcus Freeman for Notre Dame. Number 7, Hugh Freeze for Auburn. Number 8, Dabo Swinney at Clemson. So that's your second ACC head coach on the list. And your third ACC head coach comes in at number 9, Fran Brown for Syracuse. Number 10, you got Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss. Number 11, Mike Elko at Texas A&M. And number 12, Brent Venables over at Oklahoma. So, Kenton, what stands out to you from this list? You're muted, Kenton.
Oh, here we go. All right. What stands out the most to me is your head coach. I mean, with all due respect, Fran Brown being listed as one of the top recruiters in the country, it's not the biggest surprise in the world, but it is a little bit shocking considering all things considered in terms of where we sit with the 2025 recruiting class. And even if we go before that and say, you know, his first year with Syracuse in terms of the 2024 recruiting class, I think that he's done a hell of a job to be at Syracuse. But at the end of the day, if you're talking the top, that was top 10 or top so 12. Recruiters, top 12 recruiters in the country.
He made the top 10.
Fran Brown being in that top 10, that's very high praise. And don't get me wrong, I know that if you include the transfer portal as well into that, that pumps up Syracuse's class a little bit. But I have a hard time putting him in that high this early. And that's not a disrespect to him. Again, I love me some Fran Brown more than most people. I am much higher on Fran Brown than most. I think even with this year, he's going to pop out with 7-8 wins despite an absolute murderer's row of a schedule. With that being said, I'm not sure if I'm willing to give him top 12 recruiters right now. I think that he's in that range. I think he's pushing up there. I think he really is. I think he's knocking on the door. I'm not so sure that I would invite him into the top 10 party at this moment.
Well, Kenton, I'm glad you brought up Fran Brown because I'm the host of Locked On Syracuse, and I already did a show earlier this week talking about Fran Brown and recruiting, so I'm very familiar with this. Mm-hmm. So I came to I'm already prepped for this one, all right?
Let's do it.
Do you want to know Syracuse's recruiting rankings the 5 years before Fran Brown and since Fran Brown has taken over?
I'm going to guess the average 5 years before he got there was somewhere in, the 60s or 70s in the country?
Yeah, good. So from 2019 to 2023, Syracuse's average overall recruiting ranking, according to 24/7 Sports, was 64th in the country, 11th in the ACC. But hold on. That was back when the ACC only had 14 teams.
Right.
So that was their average. Bottom 5 in the ACC. and 64th overall in the country. In fact, in 2023, the year before Fran Brown, Syracuse reached rock bottom. They were 88th overall in the nation in recruiting, last in the conference.
Right.
Now Fran Brown takes over. 2024, 37th overall in recruiting.
Mm-hmm.
8th in the ACC, upper half. 2025, there's a slight dip. Yet it's still 42nd overall, 10th in the ACC. And in 2026, Syracuse is currently top 20 overall in the nation. Do I necessarily think that'll last very long? I guess time will tell, because they are going after multiple elite recruits, Messiah Hampton from New York and Calvin Russell from Miami. But overall, Kenton, I guess my question for you is this. How many coaches on this list could actually do what Fran Brown has already done at Syracuse?
I mean, the vast majority of these coaches have been head coaches at places that were resource strapped like Syracuse, and they've done good jobs there. Not saying all of them. Obviously, we know Kirby Smart, born on third base per se. You look at Ryan Day, born on third base per se. Guys who we have not had to see. Dan Lanning is another one. With all due respect to whatever you think he does on the recruiting trail, he went from Georgia's defensive coordinator to the most resource school in America in Oregon. So I think that some of these guys, we haven't seen them have to do what he is doing in this situation, which I think it's tough to kind of parse that out. But also, some of those stats are not misleading, but need a little bit of context, right? 88th in recruiting the year that Dino Babers got fired. I was once a recruit, and I can tell you, when you know a coach is about to be fired, that changes the whole perspective of how you see a school. You could think everything is perfect about a school. You could love everything. You could think everything is amazing. If the rap is, that coach ain't going to be there too much longer. Hey, that coach's seat is hot as fish grease. That will absolutely play into where you're going for school. For example, for me personally, coming to NC State, for me, was the best idea because Doran was going to be new in this job. So I said, regardless of what happens, unless it is a complete and utter crap show, he's likely going to be my head coach my entire playing career. And now, 10 years, or I believe 13 years later, he's still the head coach there and all that good stuff, which is great. But knowing that a head coach is about to get fired, you don't go there unless you have to, unless you are absolutely like, hey, I don't got no other options. And this coach who everybody in the fan base seems to be out on and all that. So I think 88th is not an indication of how hard it is to recruit at Syracuse as much as it is how hard it is to recruit at Syracuse, and the coach is about to get fired. But I will concede, I don't think Fran Brown is a bad recruiter. I've never said that. I would never go on any record saying Fran Brown doesn't belong anywhere near this list. I think he's right on the outside. I would just like to see just a little bit more before I throw him in here. And also, like I said, there are multiple guys that were born on third base in this list. When's the last time Oregon had a recruiting class that was outside the top 15, regardless of who the head coach is?
I don't know.
That's my point. Like, at the end of the day, recruiting at Oregon is like going to the club and picking up whether you got a Maserati and $100 bills falling out your pockets. Well, you don't need the most game in the world when you're like, hey, everybody, drinks on me. The entire bar's on me. I bought it out. You don't need a ton of game when you can do that. So I see where you're coming from in that aspect, and I get why a Dan Lanning being on this list is like, but are you really? I get that. But at the same time, we still got to look at the results and say, hey, this is what you have objectively done. Now, if Fran pulls in the top 20 class, put him in that top 10. As a matter of fact, raise him up in that top 10. A top 20 recruiting class in Syracuse, New York. Oh, give him his guts, raise him up on that list. But again, right now, I'm just a little bit skittish to say he's top 10 already.
Fair enough. We can continue this conversation, though, because I do want to discuss the other head coaches that made the list, Dabo Swinney, who came in at 8, and Mario Cristobal, who was 2nd. And also I want to talk about whether or not any other ACC head coach should have made Brian Smith's list. So we'll talk about that next here on Locked On ACC. The NBA Finals are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. I mean, seriously, the Indiana Pacers, they just keep pulling a rabbit out of there. You know what? game-winning shot last night. There's just never been a better time to get in on the action here with this NBA Finals. And FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live with player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays. Fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. New to FanDuel? Well, it's the perfect time to sign up because you can head to FanDuel.com right now and place your first $5 bet. And guess what? If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. This is Locked On ACC. I'm Jackson Holzer, the host of Locked On Syracuse, filling in for Alex Dano, who is still in Europe. We wish him nothing but the best there, having a great time. Of course, on Locked On ACC, we are always joined by Kenton Gibbs, one of the hosts of Locked On Wolfpack and former NC State defensive tackle. We left off talking about the top 12 head coach recruiters in the nation, according to football recruiting expert from Locked On, and also the host of the new Locked On Portal podcast, Brian Smith. We discussed Fran Brown in the first segment, but I do want to discuss the other head coaches that made the list. So you had Mario Cristobal at Miami, who came in second place, and Dabo Swinney made 8th on this list. Kenton, what's your takeaway from that?
You know, I look at Mario Cristobal and I say he's a great recruiter. He's done a great job. But I also want to throw out a little bit of context here. Miami has finished in terms of where they have been in recruiting historically. They finished 13th amongst Power 5 programs in the last 20 years. So Mario Cristobal ain't been there for 20 years. He has not been a guy that anybody would say, hey, he is the sole driving force behind this thing. But again, how much can you say is Mario? How much can you say is the university? There's definitely that aspect of it in terms of what we see from this staff and from their ability to recruit and their rankings and all that type of stuff. You definitely got to have that conversation of what's what. How is he actually doing it? What is the deal in terms of is it Mario? Is it the situation? What's the deal? Because I think that there's definitely some value and some credence in asking that question. But again, the results are there for Mario to where I'm not sure I'd be questioning it as saying, hey, you don't belong.
Yeah, I definitely don't question Mario Cristobal being on the list. I think number 2 is a little bit too high. That being said, I mean, getting Jackson Cantwell, who at the time of his recruitment was actually, it might have been changed right before he committed to Miami, but he's regardless, 5-star player, top 10 overall in the country. So he definitely deserves to be on this list. I would argue that Dabo Swinney at 8 is a little low.
Yeah, I agree.
On that list. And I think people forget that Clemson now is not what Clemson was 15 years ago.
Yeah.
Dabo Swinney built up that program to what it is. And I think we forget it because he's been with Clemson for a very long time now. But I just think the fact that he built Clemson to what it is now, it was basically through recruiting, right?
Yeah.
Through recruiting, obviously solid. Obviously, we know he's a great game day head coach as well, but we're solely talking about recruiting here and getting talent to commit to Clemson. He did that. He built up that program. Go look at their season history before Dabo Swinney and then when he took over. So when I look at the premier recruiters in the nation, yes, he might be stubborn a little bit with the transfer portal, but you know what? He can recruit, and I think he should be a top 5 on this list.
Keeping Dabo out of the top 5 is very interesting to me because what evidence do we have that he was born on third base in terms of recruiting? What evidence do we have that says, hey, Clemson and Clemsoning wasn't a thing before he got there? In fact, we have evidence to the contrary. We have evidence that Clemson historically was not the best place to be at. It was not a place that people were like, hey, you need to go to Clemson. If you are a star, you are going to Clemson, and that's all, and that's all. That's it. That just was not the case before Dabo got there. So I think we need to put more respect on his name nationally in terms of, hey, he is this guy as a recruiter. He is exactly who we think he is because Trevor Lawrence, do you get the number 1 player in the country there by accident? Deshaun Watson, the guy that off-field stuff aside, Fantastic. You cannot make enough arguments for how good he has been in the league before he, started to suffer some injuries back to back. And again, the off the field stuff. DeAndre Hopkins, Bowers, all those guys, Vic Beasley, first rounder after first rounder after first rounder, the Terrell brothers, so many balls.
I was gonna say one more. I think CJ Spiller as well. He might have been the first 5-star guy that he got.
Yeah, but that's why I have to give credit to Dabo and say Clemson was not a destination school until he got there. So I think that he deserves more credit than guys who you walked into a situation where maybe your school was not the school that always won championships, but if you're knocking on the door and you're on the precipice of greatness, you're right there for greatness, right? I think it's a lot easier to come into that than a school that has lingered in mediocrity for decades before you got there. And then all of a sudden you raise them up to this level. And besides that, I do understand the idea that, hey, you can't really say that his inability to recruit the portal or his, choice to not lean as heavily in the NIL as some of the other national heavy hitters is a hindrance because he chose it to be that way. But even still, even with those things, Clemson is still one of the top recruiting teams every year. You don't see Clemson in the 20s in recruiting. That just doesn't happen. So, I really and truly think that Dabo needs a little bit more respect from my man Smitty on this one.
We are in agreement. I'm going to pull up the list again here. I mean, do you put him ahead of Kirby Smart?
I'd leave him behind Kirby. What
about Mario?
Mario is such an interesting case because he's a double dose of the born on third base. From Oregon to Miami, that's a double dose of born on third. But I'd say 2A, 2B for those two. Honestly, I'd say 2A, 2B. Really,
I think I can get behind you on that. I think this one's obvious. I'm taking Dabo Swinney and recruiting over Ryan Day. I'm sorry, Ryan Day wasn't born on third base. He was born on home plate.
I agree. Hey, born in the middle. He was born in the middle, and the pitcher can't pick him off.
I think me and you can recruit at Ohio State. It really isn't that difficult to recruit at Ohio State. We just come to Ohio State with Brian Hartline. If you're a wide receiver, we'll get you a first. You'll be top 5 in the draft. Dan Lanning at Oregon. I mean, with all due respect to Dan Lanning, again, I don't know if it's born on home plate, but born on third base for Dan Lanning. James Franklin. James Franklin definitely deserves there. Marcus Freeman, Hugh Free. I mean, I got to take Dabo over a lot of these guys. And just solely recruiting, he built the program.
At the absolute worst I could see anybody putting him at, absolute worst, is 5th. The absolute worst. Like, if you don't understand ACC football at all and you're saying, you know what, I'm going strictly by what you have produced, you can't tell me he belongs behind James Franklin and Hugh Freeze. You can't tell me that. You really cannot tell me, hey, strictly by what your classes have ranked and what you have done, you belong behind those two. Absolutely not. And that's not even factoring the on-the-field production. That's not even factoring the whole everybody and their mama screaming their heads off about the his wide receivers never get open in terms of Drew Allen. He'd be so good, his wide receivers just never get open. Well, that sounds like a personnel problem to me. Sound like y'all just ain't got no good receiver. What is, whose fault is that? So I could see Dabo at worst at 5th, no worse than that.
I agree 100% with you that he is definitely a top 5 recruiter in the nation. And you can even make a case that he's 2, 3.
Yeah,
on
I think there's an argument. There's more of an argument for him at 2 than 8. I would 1,000% say that.
Yep. We're in agreement on that. Do you think that there's any other ACC head coach that deserves consideration or maybe even should have made the top 12?
I don't think that there's any other ACC coaches that should have made the top 12. However, I think that the same way that I have Fran Brown as, he's to me, he's right there. He's literally right there. I think that Manny Diaz, we need to start talking about him. We need to start talking about him because he is at one of the schools that has the highest barriers, the highest paywalls, blockages for players to get in. You're talking about Duke here, baby. We're not just talking about any old, like, oh, this is just get in where you fit in type of school. This is one of those Harvard of the ACC type schools And yet he is still finding ways to come up with some pretty impressive classes here in terms of, again, Duke football now. We have not seen this type of stuff very often. Elko kind of ushered in a really good wave. I think that Manny is kind of riding that wave to more success. But if anybody says that Duke is a born on third base situation, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
If we were talking basketball, yeah.
Exactly. But
you know, it's like I mean, with all due respect to John Shire, it's almost like the Ryan Day. You know,
right.
It's like you're taking over the best situation basically possible. You have unlimited resources. Now you still got to give credit to those guys who end up doing the job. You know, I've seen head coaches tank before where they completely sink a program. So you got to still give them credit, but you're right. Duke football and him still being able to pull out, I think he pulled out a top 5 ACC class in 2025. That is definitely really impressive. Another head coach who I believe deserves a shout out here, Brent Key at Georgia Tech.
Yeah.
Georgia Tech in 2025. I'm looking at it right now. Take a guess on 24/7 Sports. Don't look. Take a guess on 24/7 Sports where they rank in the ACC in recruiting.
First, I just want to let everybody know. My prediction on Syracuse was so spot on. Jackson now thinks I'm cheating. He thinks I'm looking. I'm going to say Georgia Tech was in the 25 to 30 range.
Yes, but you didn't necessarily answer my question.
Oh, well, 27?
No, I meant in the ACC.
Oh, in the ACC, I'd say they were what, 4th?
Close.
3rd? Oh, my. Oh, they were cooking. Okay.
They were cooking. I mean, you got a 5-star in Josh Petty out of Georgia?
Yeah.
A 5-star lineman out of Georgia went to Georgia Tech instead of Georgia.
I mean, if you want to stay home, then you only got 2 options. You only got 2.
I know, but I'm just pointing out, like.
No, you're right, though. That is
Tech fans are going to try to pull up like 4 to 5 examples of this, but how many 5-star recruits out of Georgia pick Georgia Tech instead of Georgia?
You're absolutely right.
How many?
It is just an objective fact that, again, Kirby Smart Company, it is a much more proven brand. It is much easier to sell Georgia and, hey, this is how many first-round picks we made than Georgia Tech. And Georgia Tech's another one of those like Duke. The barriers are not low. The academics, not low. You have to absolutely get into it. So, you know, them being –
Put some respect on the University of Georgia, though. That's a tough school to get into.
You think Georgia's on the same level as Georgia Tech?
I did not say it was on the same level.
That's what I'm saying. It's not.
I did not say it's Duke or Georgia Tech. I'm just saying it's not an easy school to get into.
I'm not saying that Georgia's allowing anybody in there, but I'm saying there's a difference. It's in the words of what is his name? J-May, it hit different when you're talking about a Georgia Tech or a Duke, as opposed to, again, these universities, all of them give out good degrees, okay? My NC State degree has opened some wonderful doors for me. I'm not saying, hey, NC State education is nothing. It's a Research One Institute, okay? It's different than Duke. It's different than Georgia Tech. You know, same thing with Georgia. With all due respect to them, it's different than Georgia Tech.
You know, some say that the SEC just means more or it's different, but I'm just making a joke there. Georgia Tech, by the way, not 25 to 30 in recruiting. They were 21st in the composite rankings. 21.
Ooh, Coach Key is cooking.
Class.
Coach Key is cooking. I love it.
You know, I'm starting to think if Georgia Tech has a really good year this upcoming season, they go maybe 9-3, maybe 10-2. He's going to get some other head coaching looks. I can just see it.
He's not leaving Georgia Tech.
I know. I mean, that's what everyone says. Nobody's ever going to leave.
But that's his alma mater. That's his alma mater. How many guys are coaching at their alma mater and leave?
I understand. You know what? I totally get it. I've just seen too much. I've just seen too much to where, like, yeah.
He's got PTSD, ladies and gentlemen. He's got PTSD from coaches.
PTSD because it really hasn't like happened like so bad to like myself with any of my teams, but it's just you see it around the country where like, he's never going to leave, and then lo and behold, he leaves.
Yeah.
he just takes a different job, and it's just like it happens.
Yeah.
It just happens.
I think you'd have to pull up you'd have to absolutely back up the Brinks truck to get Key away from there in a way that is, I don't think most teams would be willing to do that off one really good season and 2 to 3 really good recruiting classes. I'm not sure teams would, but I mean, hey, I've seen teams reach for less, so I wouldn't be surprised. I'd be more surprised that Key left that place because he seems to be a yellow jacket through and through, and I absolutely adore him for it.
I didn't say he was going to leave, but I do think he'll get some looks if he has a really good season. He'll definitely get some looks. There'll definitely maybe be some offers there. And now here comes every Georgia Tech fan saying I'm an idiot and how he's never going to leave. Here it comes. I already know it. It's okay. Just know that it's happened almost every school around the country at some point in time. I think we're good talking about these head coach recruiting rankings. So coming up, CBS Sports, ACC high impact transfers. We'll talk about that next here on Locked On ACC. This is Locked On ACC. I'm Jackson Holzer, the host of Locked On Syracuse. Of course, we're always joined by Kenton Gibbs, the host of Locked On Wolfpack and former NC State defensive tackle. So yesterday, CBS Sports released their list of ACC high-impact transfers, and they gave one transfer for every team. Now, I'm not going to go through the whole list because we got 17 different names to go over. So, Kenton, just looking at the list yourself, what stands out to you?
I think it's very interesting that Thomas Castellanos is not listed as the guy for Florida State, but more power to him. More power, because I believe quarterback is the most impactful position, which we'll get into a little bit later here. But even beyond that, I think a lot of these guys, a lot of people who talk about who's going to be the most impactful and all that good stuff, I think one guy that is really and truly not getting the respect that he deserves is that edge rusher from Purdue that headed on over to Clemson. I really do think that guy's something special. I really, really do. And I think that if you were to tell me, hey, he's going to be the most special transfer guy in terms of positive impact this year, I can see that. Also, Kendrick Raphael headed from NC State to Cal. They've got carries. They got plenty of carries. They got all the carries in the world available because that running back room, me and Jackson got calls saying, hey, would you consider it? Like, Berkeley said, really not kidding. I know you're big on education. You get a great education out here, man. They were.
You're right. I did get a call. It didn't last long though.
Yeah. I'm sure they asked about that.
They called me and they were like, "Hey, so we haven't really seen you. So what's your height and weight?" I gave it to them, and I didn't get it. All of a sudden, it went to dial tone. I couldn't hear him anymore.
He said, "Coach Wilcox, well, you sure you got some scholarship money for me?" But no, in all seriousness, I think that that's a situation where you're looking at a ton of snaps and a ton of carries available for him. But like I was saying, Will help. I think with that depth and the just sheer volume of talent that Clemson has, adding in Will help is just like, what are we doing, man? What are we doing? What is this? We talked about Dabo not using the transfer portal for him to do that, for him to get a sack specialist from Purdue. They didn't have to worry about anybody else there. You didn't have to worry about blocking anybody else. So, I'm yikes. Just a big yikes to the tackles in the ACC having to block a guy that's going to be drafted in the top 5 in Parker, and then this guy on the other side. My T's and P's, thoughts and prayers are with you all.
Yeah, rip Steve Angeli at Syracuse. He's on this list, by the way. He was the Syracuse representative, which is really funny because I can get into it for like 2 seconds here. They also got another quarterback, Ricky Collins, and they mentioned in the article that like he'll have to beat out Ricky Collins for the starting job. And so then I'm like, how can you say that he is the most impactful for Syracuse if you don't even know if he's going to be the starting quarterback? It would have been very simple in the article if they just kind of cheated a little and said, all right, we're going to give it to the Syracuse quarterback. We're going to say it's either Ricky Collins or Steve Angeli for him. But that's neither here nor there. This is not the Syracuse show. This is Locked On ACC. So we don't have to talk too much about Syracuse here, even though it's in my background. I mean, I have to represent a little bit here. Impact for this list, they were implying positive impact.
Right.
But we can also talk a little negative impact as well. because I'm going to give you, in my opinion, the most polarizing transfer out of anyone in the ACC.
I already
It's
know
Carson
you're
Beck
going to
in
say.
Miami.
Yeah, I already know
It's
it.
Carson Beck. 100% the most polarizing. Because here's the thing. You tell me Thomas Castellanos at Florida State, all right, maybe he has like some sort of ceiling, but we've seen enough of him to know what his floor is. Like that's
fair.
kind of,
That's
like
fair.
we know his floor. We know what he is, and maybe he can be a little bit more than that. With Carson Beck, this was a guy that heading into last season was projected to be the number 1 pick in the NFL draft. And obviously, he did not live up to that expectation, considering that he's still in school and that he's no longer at Georgia. He's at Miami. And he's also coming off elbow surgery on his throwing arm. That's not good.
Yeah.
So when you're talking, he was Miami's guy. Like on this list, it's Carson Beck, most impactful transfer. Kenton, he's definitely going to be the most impactful transfer at Miami. He's going to be the most impactful transfer in the ACC. But like I said at the very top, impact can be positive and impact can be negative. So he is the most polarizing transfer out of anyone in the ACC.
See, that's solid logic there, because this is the logic of, hey, the idea that humans should work together collaboratively made a great impact on society. But you know what made an even bigger impact? The asteroid. That made a much bigger impact. I get where you're going here, because he does have the ability to alter and change not only this season, but I really and truly believe the course of Miami football history. And I'm not joking.
History. Hold on here. History.
Let me tell you why. How many of these games on Miami's schedule do you think that they can win without Carson Beck rolling at least a decent clip this year? How many do you think they can win?
Not Notre Dame. Bethune-Cookman.
Okay, you got one.
That's a gimme.
Mm-hmm.
South Florida.
Okay.
Do you give him Florida at home even if Carson Beck isn't 100%? Like, I think they could win that game because
I personally don't.
It is kind of a state rivalry, maybe. Like,
I won't call it a gimme. But I'll give him a point.
It's definitely not a gimme. I'm just saying, like, you're talking about can win the game. Like, they can beat Florida even if Carson Beck isn't 100%.
Could, yes. I'll give you a 0.5 on that one. Sure. Yeah.
At Florida State, I guess they can win. Louisville at home,
you're up to 3.
Louisville at home, I guess they can win.
3.5.
But again, can win. It's like, again, it's Carson Beck's health here. Stanford at home, they should be able to beat them with no quarterback. At SMU, they're not winning. At SMU, they're not winning if Carson Beck is not healthy. Syracuse at home, I don't know how good Syracuse is going to be honest with you, this upcoming season. I mean, they're also a very polarizing team in the ACC, in my opinion, because I don't know what's going to happen with quarterback there. NC State at home.
I'll give you another half for Syracuse, so that puts you at 5.
You could beat NC State at home, I guess, and then at Virginia Tech, at Pitt, pick one game.
All right, so 5.5. So you just named 6.5 games, and that was a lot of gimmies. More of those wins came from, or a lot of pick'ems, not gimmies.
They're mostly. If you're telling me that Carson Beck is not healthy, then a lot of the games here that you would think that they should win or have a very good chance of winning, all of a sudden kind of can become pick'em games. And the game like at SMU goes from that's going to be a tough one to you got no chance.
And that is my point. Let's just say that all of these pick'ems except 2 go the other way. You're looking at a 3-4 win season. You're looking at a 4-win season.
It's very weird because I could see Miami going 10-2, and I can also see them being Florida State from a year ago. Like that's how crazy the swing is with Carson Beck and his health. That's what I'm questioning. I want to be I think I'm higher on Carson Beck than most when he is healthy.
Absolutely.
I still think he's really good. I just want to know if the guy can throw a football.
Absolutely.
That's all. I just want to know if he can throw.
And I'm not disagreeing with you at all in terms of his health being the onus of this conversation. But what I am saying is, with a non-healthy Carson Beck, with a version of Carson Beck that is not going to be, he's going to be a shell of what we saw from him at Georgia, that team could win 4 to 5 games. And if they win 4 to 5 games, and I know Miami fans going to call me everything but a child of God, and I'm okay with that. They're going to say I'm sneak dissing Dono because he's not here. Well, Dono shouldn't have been enjoying the French countryside. It's his fault. But if we're talking about what that team could be, if they go 4-8 this year, do they bring Cristobal back?
Absolutely not. He's gone.
That's what I mean.
There were fans of Miami saying he should be fired after losing to Syracuse.
So that's what I mean.
Would they go 10-2 this regular season?
I believe so. 9-3 or 10-2, something. Yeah,
they went. I think they went.
They 10-2 because they lost the bowl game. Lost the bowl game. You're right.
So 10-2. 10-3.
So you're looking at a situation where if Carson Beck has a bad year, they get a new head coach. You have effectively changed the course of Miami history, as opposed to, hey, we went on to win 8-9 games, and then we gave Cristobal another year to figure it out, and maybe that third year is the year that he figured it out. People don't realize how much these details matter. And I know that we're over our time here, so I'm going to leave y'all with one story about how certain things happening in certain moments align things in a way that changes the course of your history. Michael O'Connell, NC State is down against Virginia, and McGlinchey, they're down 3 points or 2 points against Virginia. McGlinchey misses a free throw, makes one. Virginia goes up 3. Michael O'Connell then goes down the court, hits a 3-pointer to tie that game. NC State wins that game in overtime. If Michael O'Connell missed that shot, if McGlinchey makes his free throw, Kevin Keats gets fired last year. If Kevin Keats gets fired last year, guess who is not leaving his college to come to NC State?
Will Wade.
Frank William Wade. That one shot drastically changes the course of NC State basketball history because of the way this happened. Carson Beck has the same opportunity here. He has the same opportunity to get another year. You know, you can maybe make Cristobal a lifer at Miami in terms of, hey, we got him another year, and then with that next year, that was the year where he went on to do all the things. Or this could be a situation where he gets the axe early because Beck's health was not there.
Completely agree with you. And you also left out maybe the most important part of that whole NC State story there, which is that they went on to go to the Final Four.
Well, yes. That's why he didn't get fired, because they made the shot. They go on to win the ACC. They go on to go to the tournament. They go on to make the Final Four. I don't think he would have been fired if they made the tournament at all, which that shot helped them win the ACC tournament. So that's what I mean by, like, you know, I didn't want to get too deep in the weeds there, but that's what I mean in terms of, like, hey, one moment can be the changer of your program's history. This could be a moment for Miami.
You know, Syracuse also has a moment with Dino Babers in 2022 when they were 6-0 going to Clemson, double-digit lead in the second half. They have Clemson on a 3rd and 25, and Elijah Fuentes-Cundiff commits a dumb, unnecessary roughness penalty, completely flips the game, completely flips Syracuse's season. That could have been a year where Syracuse went 9-3 or 10-2. And all of a sudden, Dino Babers does not get fired after the 2023 season, because Syracuse would have said, well, he just had a really good 2022, so he's not getting fired after 2023. And Fran Brown is not the head coach of Syracuse football nowadays. You know what that's called? The butterfly effect of sports. It's pretty fun. So, all right. That just about does it, everyone. Jackson Holzer, host of Locked On Syracuse here. Kenton Gibbs, host of Locked On Wolfpack, and, of course, former NC State defensive tackle. Make sure you check us all out on social media at LO_Syracuse, for Kenton at TGIF_Kenton. And you can find his channel wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, on YouTube. And, of course, when you're done watching or listening to this podcast, you can check out the new Locked On Portal podcast with football recruiting expert Brian Smith. So, folks, thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all so much for listening, and we'll see you all again soon.